The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 11,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever challenged their power successfully. 47 different alien races stood united under one government, one military, one law that stretched across 300,000 star systems, and their combined fleets numbered in the hundreds of thousands of warships, each one capable of destroying entire planets. They had crushed the Valorian Hive, a race of insectoid warriors that had threatened the Outer Rim for 2 centuries, and they had extinguished the machine plague of Nexus 7, a rogue artificial intelligence that had consumed 17 worlds before the Concord burned it from existence. Nothing in the known universe could stand against them, and they knew this with the absolute certainty of gods looking down upon ants. Then humanity arrived first. Contact happened 63 years ago when a small human exploration vessel stumbled into Concord space near the Arcturus. Gateway and the aliens who intercepted them were amazed at how primitive these creatures were. Humans had only discovered faster than light traveled 2 centuries before, and their ships were slow and fragile, and their weapons were laughably weak by galactic standards. The Concord welcomed them as they welcomed all new species, with patronizing smiles and strict rules that could never be broken, and humanity was given 3 star systems to call their own. A tiny corner of the galaxy where they could live and grow under careful supervision. They were forbidden from developing weapons above Class 2, which meant they could defend themselves against pirates, but nothing more, and they were forbidden from exploring beyond their borders without permission, and they were monitored constantly by Concord observation stations that watched every ship, every transmission, every move the humans made for 50 years. Humanity smiled and nodded and obeyed every rule without complaint. They sent diplomats to Concord meetings who spoke softly and asked for nothing, and they traded peacefully with their neighbors, and they seemed content with their small place in the universe. Admiral Kathrava had served the Concord for 300 years, and she had seen many species join the galactic community during her long life, and she had never trusted the humans, not even for a moment. There was something in their eyes that bothered her, a spark that she had seen before in species that caused trouble, and when she looked at human diplomats smiling and bowing, she saw predators pretending to be prey. She tried to warn the Concord Council many times, but they laughed at her concerns and told her she was being paranoid about a species that could barely build ships capable of crossing their own tiny territory. Then the intelligence reports started. Coming in human ships had been detected beyond their borders. Not exploration vessels, but warships, thousands of them appearing from nowhere and using technology that the Concord had never seen before. And when Concord scouts tried to investigate, they simply vanished without a trace. Kathrava assembled her intelligence team and demanded answers, and what they found made her blood run cold. The humans had been building in secret for decades, hiding their true capabilities behind a mask of weakness, and they had found something in the dark spaces between stars. Something ancient and powerful that predated the Concord itself by millions of years. Precursor technology, the most dangerous thing in the universe. Weapons and machines left behind by a species that had disappeared long before any current civilization existed, and the humans had not only found it, but they had learned to use it. Kathrava brought her evidence to the Concord Council, and this time they did not laugh. Supreme Chancellor Vethan, the oldest and most powerful leader in the Concord, listened to her report with growing horror, and when she finished, he made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. Every fleet, every vessel, every weapon in the Concord arsenal would converge on the human homeworld, and they would strike with such overwhelming force that no human would survive. and A would make an example that would echo through eternity. A warning to any species that dared to challenge Concord authority. The mobilization took 3 months, and ships came from every corner of the galaxy. Battle cruisers the size of small moons, carriers loaded with fighter craft, destroyers and frigates and support vessels beyond counting. When the final numbers were tallied, even Kethrava was impressed by what they had assembled. 8,400 battle cruisers formed the core of the fleet, each one crewed by thousands and armed with weapons that could crack planets open like eggs, and 2 million support craft accompanied them. Fighters and bombers and troop transports and medical ships and supply vessels. It was the largest military deployment in galactic history. More firepower gathered in one place than any species had ever seen, and Kethrava was given command of this mighty armada with orders to destroy humanity completely. She accepted the honor with a mix of pride and unease because something still bothered her about this mission, and the humans had hidden their true strength for 50 years, building an army in secret while pretending to be weak, and she wondered what else they might be hiding. The fleet gathered at the Nexus Point, a region of space where multiple hyperspace lanes converged and allowed for rapid travel across the galaxy, and Kethrava stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Resolve, and looked out at the assembled might of the Concord. Thousands of ships stretched across the void, their running lights creating a galaxy of artificial stars, and she had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrible. She gave the order to move out, and the fleet began its jump toward Sol System, toward the small blue planet where humanity had been born and where humanity would die. The journey would take 16 hours, and Kethrava spent that time reviewing battle plans and checking readiness reports and trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in her stomach. They expected the battle to take 3 days at most, and they expected losses of perhaps 5%. Acceptable casualties for the complete destruction of a troublesome species. They were wrong about everything. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace and saw what was waiting for them, Kethrava understood that the Concord had made a terrible mistake and that nothing would ever be the same again. The humans had been ready for them, and the humans were not afraid. The Concord Armada emerged from hyperspace with the confidence of gods descending from heaven to punish mortals who had forgotten their place. Earth hung before them in the darkness, a small blue and green marble spinning around an ordinary yellow star, and Kethrava looked at it through the viewport of her bridge and thought about how fragile it seemed. This tiny world had produced a species that dared to challenge the greatest power in the galaxy, and in a few hours it would be nothing but ash and memory. She gave the order to broadcast the terms of surrender, a formality that the Concord always observed before destroying an enemy, and her communications officer sent the message on all frequencies, demanding that humanity lay down their weapons and submit to judgment. Silence answered them. The human homeworld did not respond, and no ships came out to meet them, and for a long moment, Kethrava wondered if the humans had simply fled, abandoning their world to save themselves. Then the sun flickered. It was not a metaphor, and it was not a sensor malfunction, and every officer on the bridge saw it happen with their own eyes and Sol itself. The star that had warmed humanity for billions of years dimmed for exactly 1.3 seconds, as if something had passed in front of it. When the light returned, the humans were there. They had not been there a moment before, and Kethrava would swear to this until her dying day, because she had been watching the sensors, and there had been nothing but empty space between the Concord fleet and Earth. Now there was a wall of ships stretching across the void. Thousands of vessels arranged in perfect formation, and each one was wrong in ways that made her eyes hurt to look at them. Their hulls seemed to bend light around them, creating halos of distorted color that shifted and changed with every passing second, and their engines burned with colors that had no names in any language Kethrava knew. shades that existed somewhere beyond the normal spectrum of visible light. Her sensor officers were shouting numbers that made no sense, and her tactical team was frozen at their stations, staring at their screens with expressions of naked terror. The human ships were not just advanced, and they were not just powerful, and they were something else entirely. Something that should not exist in a universe governed by rational laws. And at the center of their formation, something vast and ancient and utterly impossible slowly opened its eyes. Kethrava had studied the precursor legends all her life. The stories of the species that had ruled the galaxy 1,000,000 years ago and had vanished without explanation, and the stories spoke of weapons they had built, living machines of incomprehensible power that had been hidden away in the dark places. Between stars, the humans had found one of these weapons, and they had not just activated it, they had befriended it. The thing at the center of the human formation was larger than any ship Kethrava had ever seen. Larger than space stations, larger than small moons, and its body was made of something that looked like metal, but moved like flesh, and its eyes were stars. Actual burning stars contained within sockets of impossible geometry. It looked at the Concord fleet, and Kethrava felt its gaze pass over her like the attention of a god noticing an insect. She opened her mouth to give an order. Any order, but before she could speak, the first wave of Concord ships simply vanished. They did not explode, and they did not break apart, and they were not burned by weapons fire, and they just stopped existing, erased from reality as if they had never been there at all, and where 300 battle cruisers had been a moment before, there was nothing but empty space. Kethrava screamed at her fleet to open fire, and thousands of weapons discharged at once, filling the void with beams of light and missiles and torpedoes, and every form of death that the Concord had ever invented. The human ships did not even try to dodge. The weapons struck them and did nothing, and the beams bent around their hulls, and the missiles detonated harmlessly against shields that should not have been able to stop them and the precursor entity at the center of the formation did not even seem to notice. Then the humans fired back. The second wave of Concord ships tried to retreat when they saw what was coming, but space itself had become hostile around them, and reality twisted and folded in ways that crushed vessels into points of impossible density, and ships that had traveled millions of miles to reach this battle were compressed into objects smaller than a human fist in the span of a heartbeat. The third wave never even had a chance to fire their weapons in 4 hours. Kethrava watched 6,000 of her ships die, and the humans had not lost a single vessel. Her bridge was chaos around her, with officers screaming and alarms blaring and damage reports flooding in from every corner of the fleet, and she stood in the middle of it all and felt something she had not experienced in 300 years of military service. She felt afraid. The Supreme Chancellor had given her orders to destroy humanity no matter the cost, but Kethrava was not a fool, and she knew when a battle was lost, and she knew that if she stayed here, every single ship under her command would be erased from existence. She gave the order to retreat. What remained of the greatest fleet ever assembled fled like prey animals running from a predator too large to comprehend, and they scattered across a dozen jump vectors, desperate to escape the system before the ancient thing at the center of human formation noticed them. Ships died even as they ran, picked off by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere and strike without warning, and the precursor entity reached out with limbs of twisted space and crushed battle cruisers that strayed too close. Only 847 ships made it to the jump points. Only 847 ships escaped Sol System alive. Kethrava sat in her command chair and watched her fleet vanish into hyperspace around her. And she knew that the war was not over, and she knew that humanity would not let them simply run away. The humans had been patient for 50 years, and they had planned this moment down to the smallest detail, and they were not going to let any witnesses escape to warn the rest of the galaxy. The hunt was about to begin. The survivors of the Concorde fleet scattered across the galaxy like seeds carried by a violent wind, and each ship chose a different destination, hoping the distance alone would save them from the nightmare they had witnessed. Kathrava led her group toward Kepler Station, a massive military installation on the far side of Concorde space that housed repair facilities and reinforcements, and she pushed her damaged ships as hard as they could go, demanding maximum speed from engines that were already strained to their limits. The journey should have taken 6 days through hyperspace, and she spent every hour of that time reviewing what had happened and trying to understand how humanity had become so powerful without anyone noticing. Her intelligence officers worked without sleep, analyzing every scrap of data they had collected during the brief and disastrous battle, and what they found only deepened the mystery. The human ships were using technology that should not have been possible, drives that bent space in ways that violated every known law of physics, and weapons that seemed to erase matter from existence, rather than simply destroying it, and the precursor entity at the center of their formation was something out of legend, a living weapon that had been sleeping for 1,000,000 years. How had humanity found it, and how had they woken it, and most importantly, how had they convinced it to fight alongside them? Kathrava did not have answers to any of these questions, and she was beginning to suspect that the answers would not matter because the humans were not going to let her live long enough to share them with anyone. Her fleet emerged from hyperspace at Kepler Station and found the humans already waiting for them. It was impossible, and she knew it was impossible because the humans should not have been able to reach this location faster than ships that had left before them, and yet there they were, a formation of sleek predatory vessels hanging in space between the Concorde survivors and their destination. Kathrava ordered an immediate retreat, and her ships turned and fled before the humans could attack, and they jumped to random coordinates, emerging in empty space far from any system and trying desperately to figure out what to do next. The third division of the Concorde fleet had chosen a different escape route, heading toward Develos Nebula, where dense clouds of gas and radiation would hide them from sensors, and Commander Thalan had felt clever when she made this choice. She led her 112 ships into the nebula and pushed deep into the swirling clouds of colored gas, and she ordered all systems to minimum power and told her crews to be silent and wait. They waited for 3 days before the humans found them. The human ships came through the nebula like ghosts, their strange drives leaving no trail and their hulls passing through the dense gas without resistance, and they hunted the Concorde ships one by one, appearing without warning and vanishing before anyone could fight back. Thalan watched her fleet die around her, and she screamed orders that no one could follow, and she cursed the humans with every breath until a beam of light that existed outside normal space passed through her bridge and erased her from existence. No ships escaped the Develos Nebula. Kathrava received reports from across the galaxy as the human hunt continued, and every message brought news of another group destroyed, another fleet found and killed, another commander who had thought they were clever enough to escape. The 7th Fleet tried to hide in the gravity well of a gas giant, using the massive planet's magnetic field to mask their presence, and the humans found them. Within hours, the 12th Armada jumped to the far edge of the galaxy, to a region so remote that no civilization had ever bothered to explore it, and the humans were waiting when they arrived. As if they had known the destination before the Concorde ships had even chosen it, the 23rd Squadron tried to surrender, broadcasting messages of peace and offering to share everything they knew about the Concorde in exchange for their lives, and the humans accepted their surrender and took them somewhere that no one ever heard from them again. Kathrava gathered her surviving commanders through encrypted communications, using codes that had never been broken in 11,000 years of Concord history. And when she saw how few remained, she felt a despair deeper than anything she had ever experienced. 212 ships were all that remained of the 8,400 that had entered Sol System. The commanders argued for hours about what to do, and some wanted to fight, and some wanted to surrender, and some wanted to keep running until they found somewhere the humans could not follow. Kethrava listened to them all, and then she proposed a desperate gambit. They would scatter in every direction simultaneously, jumping to completely random coordinates generated by their navigation computers, and the humans could not possibly follow all of them, because not even precursor technology could be in 200 different places at once. The commanders agreed because they had no better ideas, and because they were all tired of running, and because they wanted to believe that something, anything, could save them from the fate that was hunting them across the stars. They synchronized their jumps, and at the same moment, 212 ships vanished into hyperspace, each one heading toward a different random point in the galaxy. Kethrava emerged from her jump in a system she had never seen before, a dim red star surrounded by dead planets that had never supported life, and she immediately ordered her sensors to scan for human ships. The humans were already there. They had followed every single ship in her fleet, appearing at 200 different random locations across the galaxy at the same moment, and Kethrava understood then that she was not dealing with normal enemies. The humans had access to something beyond technology and something beyond power, and they had access to knowledge itself, to information about where the Concord ships were going before the ships themselves knew. She watched on her sensors as her scattered fleet was picked off, ship by ship and captain by captain, and she wondered why the humans had not killed her yet, and why they seemed to be saving her for last. The answer came when a single human vessel approached her flagship, broadcasting a request for parley, and Kethrava realized that the humans did not want to destroy her. They wanted to talk. Kethrava stood on her bridge and stared at the human ship that hung in space before her flagship, and every instinct she had developed over 300 years of military service screamed at her to fight, to run, to do something other than simply wait. But she had seen what happened to ships that fought the humans, and she had seen what happened to ships that ran, and she knew that neither option would save her now. The human vessel was small, barely a fraction of the size of her battlecruiser, and yet it radiated a sense of power that made her scales itch, and her heart beat faster, and she could feel the precursor technology humming through its hull like a living thing. She gave the order to lower shields and allow the humans to come aboard. Her officers looked at her like she had lost her mind, but they obeyed because they were soldiers, and because they had run out of options, and because somewhere deep inside they were curious about the species that had destroyed the greatest fleet in galactic history. A single human materialized on her bridge a few moments later, transported through some method that Kethrava's sensors could not detect or explain. The human was female, middle-aged by their standards, with gray hair and tired eyes and a simple uniform that bore no rank insignia, and she looked around the bridge with an expression of mild curiosity, as if she found the alien technology interesting, but not particularly impressive. She introduced herself as Director Chen. Kethrava had expected a warrior, a general, someone who radiated the same kind of power as the ships and weapons that had killed her fleet, and instead she got this small, soft creature who looked like she would be more comfortable in a laboratory than a battlefield. "You're wondering why we haven't killed you all yet," Chen said, and her voice was calm and tired and carried no threat. Kethrava's pride demanded that she respond with defiance, that she tell this human that the Concord would never surrender, and that more fleets would come to avenge the fallen. But exhaustion won out over pride. "Yes," she said simply. Chun nodded as if this was the answer she had expected, as she walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars, and for a long moment she did not speak. "We need witnesses," she said finally. And then she turned back to face Kethrava and began to explain. The precursor entity had shown humanity many things when they first made contact with it. Secrets about the universe that no other species had learned in millions of years, and one of those secrets was the truth about the Galactic Concord. The Concord was not just an alliance of species working together for mutual benefit, and it was not just a government that maintained peace and order across the galaxy, and it was something far older and far more sinister. 11,000 years ago, the original founders of the Concord had discovered something terrifying about the universe, and they had learned that certain species, if allowed to develop freely and reach their full potential, would eventually become threats to the natural order of things. These species were different from others in ways that were hard to define, and they had something inside them, some spark of creativity or determination or madness that made them capable of things that other species could never achieve. And if left alone, they would grow and change, and eventually they would reshape the universe in their image. The founders had decided that this could not be allowed to happen. They created the Concord as a cage, a system designed to identify dangerous species early and contain them before they could become threats, and humanity was one of those species. The Concord had been watching Earth since humanity first discovered fire, and they had watched humans develop language and agriculture and science, and they had seen the spark burning inside this small aggressive species, and they had known that someday humanity would need to be controlled. The three systems that humanity was given were not a gift, and they were a prison, and the restrictions on human technology were not about maintaining galactic peace, and they were about keeping humanity small and weak and manageable. Every patronizing smile and every condescending rule and every careful limitation had been designed to prevent humanity from becoming what they were capable of becoming. "We were never going to be allowed to grow," Chun said, and her voice was still calm, but there was something hard underneath it now, and something angry, and something that had been waiting 50 years to be released. "You were going to keep us in that cage forever, breeding us like cattle, and studying us like lab animals, and making sure we never had a chance to become what we truly are." Kethrava wanted to deny it, and she wanted to say that the Concord had only wanted to protect the galaxy from a dangerous species, but she could not find the words because somewhere deep inside, she knew that Chun was telling the truth. She had always sensed something wrong about the way the Concord treated certain species, and she had always wondered why some civilizations were welcomed as equals while others were kept contained and controlled. And now she understood. "What are you going to do?" she asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. Chun smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and it was not a cruel smile, and it was the smile of someone who had been planning this moment for a very long time. "We're going to give the Concord a choice," she said. "You can accept humanity as equals, true equals with full autonomy and no restrictions and no cages and no careful management of our development, and you can welcome us into the galaxy as partners rather than prisoners. Or you can watch your remaining ships die and face humanity's judgment alone." Kethrava looked at this small, soft human who had destroyed everything she had ever believed in, and she understood that the universe would never be the same again. The cage was broken, and the prisoners were free, and now the galaxy would have to learn to live with what humanity had become. The terms that Director Chun offered were simple and clear, and they left no room for negotiation or compromise. The Galactic Concord could accept humanity as full partners in the galactic community, with all the rights and freedoms that had been denied to them for 50 years, and with no restrictions on their technology, or their expansion, or their development, and the cage would be open forever. Or they could refuse and watch their remaining ships be destroyed and face whatever judgment. Humanity chose to deliver. Kethrava transmitted the offer to her surviving commanders on encrypted channels, and she watched their faces appear on her screen one by one. 63 captains who had survived the massacre at Sol System and the hunt that followed, and she could see the exhaustion and fear and confusion in their eyes. They argued for hours about what to do, and the discussion was heated and angry, and full of accusations and blame, and through it all, Director Chun stood silently on Kethrava's bridge and waited with the patience of someone who had already won. Some commanders wanted to accept immediately, and they said that the Concord had been wrong to cage humanity and that they deserved to be free, and that fighting any longer was pointless suicide. Others said that accepting meant admitting that everything that Concord stood for was a lie, and that 11,000 years of galactic civilization had been built on fear and oppression, and that they could not live with that truth. The debate might have continued forever, but then Commander Voss of the battleship Righteous Fury spoke up, and his words changed everything. "The humans are not offering us a choice," he said, and his voice was hard and cold and full of conviction that bordered on fanaticism, and "they are offering us surrender, and I will not surrender to a species that should have been exterminated at birth." 45 ships announced their acceptance of humanity's terms immediately after Voss spoke, and their captains had heard enough, and they were tired of running, and they were tired of fighting, and they were ready to accept that the universe had changed. The remaining 18 refused. These were the true believers, the commanders who had served the Concord their entire lives and who could not imagine a galaxy where humanity walked free, and they saw the Precursor Alliance as an abomination, and they saw humanity's rise as a corruption of the natural order that had to be resisted no matter the cost. Commander Voss led them, and he rallied them with speeches about honor and duty and the sacred responsibility of the Concord to protect the galaxy from dangerous species, and he swore that he would never stop fighting, never stop hunting, never stop trying to destroy the threat that humanity represented. Kethrava listened to his words, and she remembered feeling the same way once, and she remembered the certainty she had felt when she led 8,000 ships toward Sol System, and she remembered how quickly that certainty had been destroyed. Director Chum nodded when she heard the final count, and her expression was unreadable, and she did not seem surprised or disappointed or angry. "We expected some would choose that path," she said. Kethrava stared at her in confusion, because 18 ships were still a threat, and 18 ships filled with zealots who would never stop fighting could cause tremendous damage, and surely humanity was not going to simply let them go. "You will destroy them?" she asked, and it was half question and half statement. "No," Chum said, "and we will let them leave." Why? Chum turned to face Kethrava, and for the first time since she had come aboard, something like warmth entered her eyes, and she looked almost gentle, almost kind, almost like the harmless creatures that humanity had pretended to be for 50 years, "because they have earned that right," she said, "and they came here to destroy us, and they fought with everything they had, and they lost, and now they are choosing to keep fighting, even though they know they cannot win. That takes courage, and we respect courage, even in our enemies." She paused, and the warmth faded from her eyes, and was replaced by something harder and something older, and something that had been forged in the fires of 50 years of captivity. "And because we are not monsters, Admiral, and we are just done being afraid." The 18 ships gathered together at the edge of the system, and Kethrava watched them on her sensors, and she saw Commander Voss standing on his bridge and staring back at her with hatred burning in his eyes. The human fleet parted to let them pass, and the precursor entity watched them go with its eyes of burning stars, and it did not move to stop them, and it did not reach out with its limbs of twisted space, and it simply let them flee. The 18 ships jumped into hyperspace and vanished, and they would spend the rest of their existence running and hiding, and spreading warnings about what humanity had become, and telling stories about the ancient power that the humans commanded. And the terrible day when 8,400 battle cruisers learned that some species were never meant to be contained. Kethrava watched them disappear, and she felt something that might have been relief and might have been sorrow, and might have been both at the same time. Then she turned to Director Chun. "What happens now?" She asked. Chun smiled, and it was the first genuine emotion she had shown since arriving, and her tired eyes lit up with something that looked almost like hope. "Now we build something better," she said, and together, she extended her hand in a gesture that Kethrava recognized from her studies of human culture, and after a moment of hesitation, the Admiral reached out and took it outside the viewport. The precursor entity drifted slowly past the gathered ships, and its massive body blocked out the stars, and its eyes of burning light swept across the fleet, human and Concord alike. And there was something in its gaze that looked almost like satisfaction. It had waited 1,000,000 years for a species worthy of partnership, and in humanity, it had finally found one, and now it would watch as these small, determined creatures reshaped the galaxy into something new. The war was over, and the cage was broken, and the prisoners were free. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, 18 ships fled into the unknown, carrying stories of humanity's terrible power and humanity's unexpected mercy. And the day the universe learned that some species were born to break their chains, the galaxy would never forget what happened. In Sol System, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson that humanity had taught them. Some cages exist only to be broken, and some species are meant to fly free, and humanity was done asking for permission.